somebody else just joined.
This is Bill and Bruce are the confirmed RAC invitees that we had. But if we have other RAC members that were invited, if they join, then then we'll go ahead and get them in the meeting. But since you were the two that confirmed, we'll go ahead and get started. And just a quick introduction. Just want to welcome you all, and if you don't mind, we are recording the meeting, but if you don't mind also typing just your name and affiliation in the chat, that would be much appreciated. I am Tony Beach. I'm the State Airports Manager with the Oregon Department of Aviation. And then if we can go around and do introductions, start with Alex.
Good morning, everybody. Alex Thomas, Policy Planning and Programs Manager here at the Oregon Department of Aviation.
And Andrea?
Good morning, everybody. Andrea Abrahamson, and I'm Planning and Programs Coordinator, Department of Aviation.
Bruce, do you mind just giving a quick introduction?
Sure. Yeah, and your chat is turned off, it says, by the way.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Bruce Bergman. I'm an aircraft owner, longtime person at Aurora State, own 2 hangars. I'm a retired owner of an aerial mapping company that is located on the field. And I'm the chairman of the Wiley Hangar Condo Association, which is a group of 29 hangars kind of towards the north end.
All right, thank you, Bruce. Bill.
Hey, Bill Gropp, the Director on the Board of Department of Aviation.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Bruce, for letting me know about the chat. I'm not sure I'm able to find how to activate that. So you and Bill are able to unmute and just speak up anytime if you have a question. I'm going to share the agenda here in just a second. So you should be able to see this agenda. So in this meeting, we are going over the vehicle pedestrian deviations, just the issue of those deviations, and then we're going to go over the proposed rules for Oregon Administrative Rule Chapter 738 to address those deviations. So I also just wanted to mention that this meeting is for RAC member input. So we have Bill and Bruce on the RAC, and while the public is welcome to attend, they are able to provide comments to us in writing at the email address that is listed in the notice, and they're also able to provide comments in the public hearing, which is scheduled for July 15th at 3 p.m. And that's also linked on our website. Going over the agenda. So again, we're going to go over the issue of VPDs, the proposed rules. We will get RAC member input, and then we will adjourn. Okay, I'm going to share my first presentation, so bear with me just a second. Okay, can you all see this presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So this is should be a pretty brief 20 slides going over just the issue of VPDs and the Aurora State Airport. So this is just a history, a look back at satellite imagery for the Aurora State Airport, which is the only airport that the proposed rules will take effect for. So looking back since 1994, there has been considerable development at the airport over the last few decades. And then looking at a map, the state portion, which is the light blue in the center, is a relatively small portion of non-movement area, or where most people would be maneuvering or accessing their hangars and aircraft. with their vehicles. So we have a really small portion of that property. So meaning that the controlled movement area, the red area where the taxiways and the runway are, ODAV does not own or have any control over the adjacent properties, which are all privately owned and have through the fence access. So those are the kind of darker shaded areas adjacent to the taxiways. A little bit more context, back in the 2000s, the taxiway had to shift to accommodate safety and FAA standards, so it shifted to the east, and that kind of further exacerbated the issue of VPDs or the root cause of the VPDs, because the taxiway shifted closer to some existing hangars where further squeezing just the maneuverable space, and that's going to be evident here in a future photo that's coming up here in just a second. But essentially, the movement line is just immediately adjacent to this apron area, and anyone going over that line is without authorization or clearance is causing a vehicle or pedestrian deviation. The tower opened in 2015, and it went from an uncontrolled airport to a controlled airport. So we didn't used to have non-movement area boundary markings at the edge of the taxiway, and when the tower opened, those markings went in. So that was an adjustment, and just a few photos showing from 2016 onward, we have those markings put down. And then we also have the mandatory holding position markings on the taxiways for the runway. So that's what these photos show. Again, from the ground perspective, just showing how tight the space is on the non-movement area. The first yellow dashed line on the right-hand side, this is our property line, the state property line, and then within about 5 or 6 feet, we have the non-movement area boundary marking. So there's very little space on state property for any improvements or any other changes, because that space has to be usable for aircraft. So we have very little control over anything, in those areas that I mentioned that are private property. The FAA there's a couple definitions from the FAA here. There's surface incident, which is an unauthorized or unapproved movement within the designated movement area, excluding runway incursions, or an occurrence in that same area associated with the operation of an aircraft that affects or could affect safety of flight. So that's sort of an umbrella covering a range of incidents. And the incident that we are looking at today is vehicle or pedestrian deviations. And that's defined as any entry or movement on the airport movement area or safety area by a vehicle operator or pedestrian that has not been authorized by air traffic control. And this includes surface incidents involving aircraft operated by non-pilots, such as anyone. So again, when the tower opened in late 2015, there were a significant number of VPDs. There was a downward trend until we got to 2020 when there were 0 VPDs. But then there was a increasing trend and a spike in 2022, and then followed by a continued increasing trend in 23, 2024, and 2025. So just looking at the type of deviations, we've had a mix of both vehicles and pedestrians. We've had 3 that have had conflicts with aircraft operations, meaning they've had to take some sort of evasive maneuver or change their route or stopped in order to avoid an incident or an accident. A couple common themes: we've had pedestrians walking dogs in the controlled movement area without authorization or clearance from the air traffic control tower. We've had vehicles or pedestrians positioning around light flight aircraft or just other aircraft. We've had delivery drivers that are unfamiliar with the airport and they're trying to maneuver around the hangars. We've had guests of other airport users who are unfamiliar with the airport We've had airport users assisting disabled aircraft, going out onto the move-in area without clearance or authorization. We've had airport users taking shortcuts to another airport destination. And then we've had airport users unaware that the tower was in operation when they went out onto the taxiway. We have had considerable discussion with the FAA on the issue of VPDs going back since the tower opened. The FAA came and did an inspection in 2023, and they had given their recommendations from their safety compliance inspectors. And then the FAA has also issued letters to ODAV requiring a corrective action plan, including establishing rules that prohibit VPDs. A little bit more about the efforts and outreach that ODAV has conducted since going back to 2017. We have installed cameras on the tower to better identify the issue and be able to address it. We've added the stencil text next to that non-movement area line to warn people in plain language to not cross that movement line. We've added signage to gates and out in the islands near the movement line. We've conducted monthly outreach with airport users. We've sent out a one-page flyer for businesses and operators at the airport to help distribute that education and outreach. We've added placards to the gate keypads, reminding anyone coming through the gate that they need to not cross over that non-movement line. We used to have 2 gates on state property that were just kept open during business hours. ODAV closed those to try to control and limit unauthorized access. We started this rulemaking in 2022 with a temporary and a permanent rulemaking process. In that rulemaking process, there were a few recommendations for improving some engineering improvements, so enhancing the markings for better visibility, implementing driver's training. And then there was one other comment about decreasing the fine amount. So we didn't go ahead and continue with the permanent rulemaking process at that time, and we completed those recommendations. So we did do marking updates. We improved those markings from a 6-inch wide non-movement line to a 12-inch wide, so it's much more conspicuous, along with a whole bunch of other marking improvements on the airport. We completed and implemented the driver's training for those that have authorization to enter the movement area. We also have the non-movement area driver's training that has been published for over a year now. So what else? We have the temporary rules filed again as approved by the board in February 2026 this year. And so those rules are still current through August 3rd. And then again filed on June 18th, the permanent rules that we're looking at today. Just a couple examples, just some photos that show the incidents occurring. So pedestrians walking over that non-movement line, vehicles driving over the non-movement line. Especially this one highlighting the proximity to an active aircraft operation. Definitely something that we're trying to avoid. Again, just the stencil text, the marking improvements that have been made, the signage, the gate placards, the outreach, the flyers, and the information that we've been sharing. And again, the marking improvements, so enhancing that non-movement area boundary marking. And then in our 2024 surface seal project, where we have made some other improvements and again widened that from a 6-inch to a 12-inch marking to make it more conspicuous. So I mentioned earlier the light blue areas, that state portion that we have ownership control, and then the darker areas are all private property where we have less ownership and control. I do want to acknowledge that on private property, improvements have been made and efforts have been made to help mitigate VPDs. And ODAV is greatly appreciative of those efforts and the significant investments that have been made to do so. on the north end with secondary containment gates, preventing vehicles or pedestrians from just kind of wandering out onto the taxiway. And then other markings and surface painted signage to make people aware of what that area is and to not cross it. One other comment that the rules are needed because we have limited ability to do any enforcement or follow-up action through our access agreements or our lease agreements. So short of more nuclear options like terminating agreements or threatening to terminate agreements, we really don't have any other middle ground or kind of intermediate step to be able to remedy the issue of vehicle or pedestrian deviations. And a little bit of history on just the rulemaking process. Back in 2019, the legislature approved Senate Bill 54, which gave ODAV authority to impose fines for VPDs at state airports with a control tower. We only had one VPD in 2019 through 2021, so we did not continue with that process at that time. And again, starting in 22, we had a series of VPDs, which prompted the temporary rulemaking back then, and the permanent rulemaking that I mentioned earlier. We did establish a temporary rule in 2022. The board approved it. The rule was in effect through December 22. We had 0 violations or penalties then. And then again, we had the feedback that I mentioned earlier for the permanent rulemaking, where we agreed to make some engineering improvements and implement driver's training before proceeding with the permanent rulemaking. Again, we had that spike in 2022, and then we had the increasing trend in 23 through 25. And so we again initiated the temporary rulemaking in February of 26, and it seems to be working. We've had 0 violations or penalties issued to date since October of 2025. So the permanent rule was filed June 18th, and we are holding our rulemaking advisory committee meeting today. And again, there's a public hearing on July 15th, Wednesday at 3 p.m. I'm going to go into a different presentation really quick. Just going to share my screen with this one. And then when I run through the proposed rules, then we'll open it up to the RAC for RAC member input and any recommendations or other changes from the RAC. So just a brief overview. I've already kind of gone over the need. So that's explained here. Essentially, we do need to keep vehicles or pedestrians without authorization outside of the controlled movement area. They do pose safety risks for aircraft operations, and they can possibly lead to substantial risk of injury, loss of life, or damage to property. And again, the absence of any established civil penalties or rules prohibiting that activity does materially limit the department's ability to deter or correct those hazardous conditions. We've talked a lot about the recent spike in VPDs over the last few years, and then again, the considerable effort to make engineering improvements and also share education outreach to try to prevent them. So just a quick overview of the proposed rules that we're looking at here today. We are looking at adopting Oregon Administrative Rule 738 050-0005, vehicle pedestrian deviations and civil penalties. And there are a few subsections within that rule that establish the rule for VPDs and civil penalties. They provide definitions, conduct that is a vehicle pedestrian deviation. They include responsible parties and civil penalties that may be imposed. contested cases. They explain cases for multiple responsible parties, consideration for reducing or waiving civil penalties, and the civil penalty formula. In Oregon Administrative Rule 738-140-0020, we're amending that rule to essentially add a vehicle or pedestrian deviation as a violation for which a civil penalty may be imposed. So just running through those really quick, I'm going to go through each of those. And the first item is that the department and the board find that the movement area by any person, vehicle, or aircraft operated by a non-pilot within the movement and safety area of the airport creates a potential for serious physical harm or death, and that penalties for such movement may discourage this activity. Definitions. The following definitions apply to this rule. Movement and safety areas, that refers to all areas of the Aurora State Airport under the control of the air traffic control tower used for taxiing, takeoff, and landing of aircraft, not including loading ramps and parking areas. Air traffic control is defined as meaning the person or persons responsible for the coordination and positive control over the movement of traffic within the controlled airspace and movement and safety areas. And then identifying the conduct that constitutes a vehicle or pedestrian deviation. Any pedestrian or vehicle, including aircraft operated by non-pilots that enters or moves within the movement and safety areas without clearance from air traffic control, is a vehicle or pedestrian deviation, or a person that provides, allows, or otherwise causes another person to enter or move within the movement and safety area without clearance from air traffic control. Not limited to sharing airport access information, failing to prevent piggybacking through a gate, failing to maintain positive control over guests inside the fence, or failing to prevent unauthorized access from private property. That also constitutes a vehicle or pedestrian deviation. Any person that commits or causes a vehicle or pedestrian deviation is a responsible party against whom the director may impose a written warning for a single vehicle or pedestrian deviation in a 6-month period, a civil penalty of $500 for a second vehicle or pedestrian deviation committed within a 1-year period, a civil penalty of $1,000 for a third deviation within a 2-year period, a civil penalty of $1,500 for a fourth deviation committed within a 2-year period, and $2,500 for a fifth or subsequent deviation committed within a 2-year period. A civil penalty of $2,500 for any single violation where the responsible party has intentionally or with reckless disregard committed a vehicle or pedestrian deviation may be imposed as well. There are criteria for contested cases, and if a prior vehicle or pedestrian deviation is contested and has not become a final order, the civil penalties assessed pursuant to this section will be rescinded if the prior vehicle or pedestrian deviation does not become final. And then where there are multiple responsible parties, the director will impose a civil penalty against each responsible party. For example, if a tenant allows a driver to enter the movement and safety area and the driver does not have clearance from air traffic control, and it is the tenant and driver's first vehicle pedestrian deviation within a 6-month period, the director will issue separate warnings to each responsible parties. If this is the tenant's second deviation in a single year and the driver's third deviation in a single year, the director will assess a $500 penalty against the tenant and a $1,000 civil penalty against the driver. And then considerations for reducing or waiving civil penalties. The director may do that for a vehicle or pedestrian deviation after a consideration of each or any of the following. And that's whether the person or responsible party is a repeat violator, the amount of time between each deviation, the egregiousness of the deviation, cooperation and responsiveness of the violator with the department, the responsible party's attempt to control the access, other facts and circumstances around the deviation, and any basis for reducing the civil penalty as set forth in Administrative Rule 738-140-00054. Finally, the civil penalty formula in 738-140-0030 does not apply to a vehicle or pedestrian deviation. And then we get into the amendment of Administrative Rule 738-140-0020, which again just adds a vehicle or pedestrian deviation under that prior rule that where a civil penalty may be imposed. So that is the complete overview of the proposed rules that we're looking at today. And I know I went through that quickly, and there's a lot of detail there, but if I'm happy to go back over to any slide, and I want to open it up to any RAC input and proposed amendments or other recommended changes.
I've got a list of comments. Bruce, so whenever you're ready for that, I can go through them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, item 1, Department of the Board finds that the movement by any person, what about emergency responders and so on? That's one thing. It seems any person is sort of broad. Talks about control tower, air traffic control. What happens when the tower is closed? That's not addressed. To me, it's a bit vague in after-hour points in time. I guess the main comment I have is the section 3B, a person that provides or allows otherwise causes another person to enter. I understand what you're trying to do there with, say, a tenant, allowing somebody to come in and not controlling them and so on, but how far does that go? We have a condo association with 29 hangars, 25 owners. We have done what we can to educate everybody, but that's 25 free spirits in a lot of ways. And I can see where implicating an owner or a tenant allowing something, but how far does that go? Does it go back to the association as well? It just seems like there's a lot of layers there, and I don't know how far the finding structure would go on that. So I guess talking about things that would be contested, and there's all the different things that could lessen the impact of a violation, but who is the judge and who is the final arbiter of those decisions? Talks about the director, and I assume you're talking about the director of aviation department, but is that handled through various staff members, or is the director completely involved in this and making the decisions? And then I guess my last kind of comment question is the driver training, which we've had numerous discussions about, and who's allowed to access the taxiway, say for towing and so on. I guess I didn't realize that was in place and in use. For a while, we were sort of in a mode where it was like we've been doing for the last 20 years, where if we had ATC clearance, we could tow an aircraft on the taxiway. So apparently that is no longer the case. If so, it seems like that should be perhaps publicized a little bit more so people don't call ATC to use it and ATC says fine, but then we're actually in a violation mode. So anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm happy to address some of those, but I want to get any other comments before I kind of respond to those.
I guess I'm the only other RAC member here, so with that said, let's see. My comments are one, after reviewing the proposal, do agree that this is the next step. This is not a abnormal step for government. This is kind of what other public safety basically parts of agencies do, whether it's traffic, whether it's anything involving public safety. I did have the question earlier in the process of rulemaking about the emergency vehicle and first responders, and the answer I got was acceptable for me, which is if there's an emergency in the airport movement area, the tower will close. The tower will close the airport because there's a crash or there's something going on, and then thus the VPD thing goes away because that is now the runway's closed, or the taxiway, or both the runway taxiway are closed. So the first responder does have the ability to get out onto the movement area without any issues. Let's see. I did have a comment that I do believe this is important to do, as in the last, I believe it was the SAT meeting that occurred at UAO. We did have six, I believe, members of the FAA regional staff come to that meeting from traveling to that meeting. They were not local, with the leader of the region was there and approached me to say that we needed to do immediate action to remedy this situation. And this is what I would consider not above what other public safety agencies do, in the fact of this is the method of doing things. It does have a full set of steps, and the first response, your first one is that, and there is an appeal process defined in here, and this is the normal way without going through, for instance, in traffic safety, you have to go see a judge. Here it's all handled internally, so there's no additional cost to whoever created the violation to appeal. So with that said, I do like the proposals as stated, and believe that they are a step forward in helping us stay in conjunction with what FAA requirements are for this airport.
All righty. Well, thank you for your comments, and I do want to just take a minute to address kind of each of these. Bruce, your first one about the definition of responsible party and any person being too broad, that was a specific recommendation or item that we had discussed in the previous rulemaking process, further defining the responsible party, and it is quite broad because any person that commits the conduct or the activity mentioned in the rule is committing a deviation, and we really are looking at preventing any person, so everybody, from committing a vehicle pedestrian deviation. Your comment about and Bill's comment about emergency responders, what Bill said is exactly correct. In the event of an emergency, tower does close the affected areas, and even in the event that an emergency responder went out there, we're not looking to slow down emergency response or penalize first responders. So that's why we do have the capability to waive or reduce the penalties based on the conditions listed in the rule. So that would be something we would do. And then when the tower is closed, what happens is that the rule is written so that it applies to the areas where that are under the control of the tower. So when the tower is not open, the areas are not under control of ATC. So so that would not constitute a vehicle or pedestrian deviation. That doesn't mean that that safety issue is not still there. And then your question about the authorization, that's something that will be addressed in a separate rulemaking process on authorization, and that has not been completed yet. The training is published, but the authorization part is not complete. You asked how far does Section 3B go? And that's really going to be dependent on the facts and conditions of each individual deviation. It's, we're not looking to find 20, 30 people all at once. We don't want to find anybody. I've made this very clear. Our goal is to eliminate and fully mitigate the issue of vehicle pedestrian deviations. So ODAB is not looking to just issue civil penalties. And so we are looking at the person, or if there are other persons that contributed to somebody causing a VPD. So I don't have a good answer as far as, a limit. But within reason, if somebody is responsible, then we're going to be looking at that. You asked who is the judge and final arbiter. The rule says that it is the director of the department. That can be delegated, but ultimately it's the director who is responsible for the final judgment in this case. And then I just talked about the driver's training. So that I think that answered all of your questions or comments, Bruce. And then Bill, I do appreciate all of your comments on the steps that we've taken and how we are attempting to address this safety issue. Is there any other discussion or questions on the rules?
Well, I too, as a longtime aircraft user and, following this whole saga since the tower has been in place, I agree this is a necessary step. I guess the hope is that it is done judiciously and with consideration of mitigating factors, and not in a heavy-handed way. But it is obviously the next step that needs to be there to bring the seriousness to the issue to the people that are maybe not paying attention. So I think you're on the right track here. So I'm all for it.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Really appreciate that. Then with that, if there are no other comments or questions, I'll let you all have the rest of your morning back. Last chance. Okay. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for your time and participating on the RAC. Really do appreciate it. And I will look forward to the public hearing on the 15th. Go ahead, Alex.
Hey, Andrea or Tony, do you happen to have in front of you just the date for the final public comment? Date
Yeah.
and time. Would hurt to just throw that in here too.
Should be the 21st.
Let's see if I can drag this notice over. My screen is kind of freezing. Well, bear with me here.
Or did I hear that it's going to be on the 21st? At what time?
The hearing is still going to be on the 15th, but so the hearing is July 15th, 3 p.m. But then let's see, is it here in the
Right up above
Yes.
their last day and time to comment.
That is so thank you, Alex and Andrea.
Okay.
That is the last day and time to offer comment to the agency via writing.
Okay. And the hearing's going to be virtual?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all. Have a good morning.
Thank you.